line to the breakfast briefing which is currently underway.
Following on from the poor performance last year are not very encouraging. So I think that that is the situation that we find ourselves in. I think myself that we've got a combination of global factors and also, though, some domestic factors that we've got to address. And those domestic factors, I think, are probably the ones that loom largest at the moment. We have a very low level of investor confidence, a very low level of consumer confidence. And I think the task of creating a higher level of more inclusive economic growth does depend on us finding each other, finding business, finding labor, finding government to work together around common endeavors to place our economy on a higher growth trajectory, and one that is more inclusive than the trajectory that we've been on up until now. But I think it is worthwhile, in order to try to, think through what is it going to take to get us working more effectively together. I think it is important that we contextualize some of the challenges that we find ourselves in the global context, because I think that these are actually going to be the things that are going to shape our environment and the challenges that we're going to have to respond to over the next few years. So I just want to start with a few reflections on that. I think we all know that we've passed through and are still in, to a considerable extent, a global economic crisis. This struck us in 2008, and it struck us, I'm talking about the world, in the first instance in the form of a financial crisis that had its epicenter in the United States, in the financial system in the United States, in the context of over-exuberant expansion of the financial sector and a huge amount of financialization. I'm not sure that that was ever fully resolved, but since then we have also seen rather insipid recovery in a number of places, but also then we had a mineral commodity super cycle that saved us for some time from the full effects of this, which lasted until 2012. And then we saw a country like China undergoing very big and important structural changes in their own interests, which meant that there was a reduction in mineral commodity prices, the end of the commodity super cycle, and that meant that all countries that were producing and exporting primary products suffered from huge change in the terms of trade and in the incomes that they were earning from primary products. That's been exacerbated more recently by global gluts, and I think this is a symptom of an unresolved economic crisis, that we still have global glut of steel, with overproduction of steel, and steel being shipped at extraordinary low prices into economies around the world. And I think steel is not the only product that is facing these characteristics. Now, one of the ways in which crises tend to be resolved, if we look back over history, is that there is a new technological revolution. That's often what happens. And I think that we can see now that this is what is happening, and this is going to shape the future. And this is this thing called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution is it's built on what's called big data. The ability to manage and use large data flows. And I'm told that when we move from 4G to 5G, we will suddenly see things like the takeoff of the Internet of Things, with large data transfers, one machine based somewhere telling another machine using the Internet how to perform. We've got robotics, we've got artificial intelligence, and we've got 3D printing. And these are just some of the 60-odd technologies that the World Economic Forum tells us are going to produce disruptive effects across production, across the world. And I think that what we need to take into account is that if we think these are things for the future, like climate change, it'll happen sometime, I think we are misleading ourselves. It's happening now. I just read about Adidas. Adidas has decided to take some of its technology back to Germany from Asia because the artificial intelligence and 3D printing leads to lower costs of production than cheap labor in Asia. This is happening already. The changes that are associated with the fourth industrial revolution are not limited to production either. They are also in service sectors and even TG in politics. I was reading an article about how in the presidential election in the United States, some of the candidates, they were using large data through a company which you identify micro constituencies. For example, you trawl through and you find that someone has, on Facebook, they've indicated that they're a gun owner. Then you do a psychological profile. This is what the article was telling us. And you decide whether the guy is militant about gun ownership or just needs reassurance. And then they decide you need reassurance. They send you a reassuring message that the candidate will ensure that gun ownership will continue. That sort of thing. This is what's happening. And I think the point about this is that what we've been told is that this is going to bring about disruptive change. Not incremental change, but radical disruptive change. I think this is the point. Now, one of the things I think that we also need to take account of is not only have we got this languid growth at the moment, what the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development calls the new normal of insipid growth, the fourth industrial revolution. We've also got widening inequality. And this widening inequality is partly the result of technology and globalization. So I read a book about two fellows from MIT, Bryn Jofferson and McNaffie, and they were talking about how in the 19th century, only a few thousand people could see the best opera singer in the world. And so there was a market for the seventh best opera singer. But now, everybody has access to the best app. So there's no market for the third best app. And what this means is it means that we have a tendency towards winner-takes-all markets. Those that succeed reap huge rewards. The also-rans get nothing. And then that sort of ethos gets carried over. So we know that the gold medal winner has a fabulous career in front of them. The bronze winner, nobody knows about and they get nothing. That's that's what we're having. And so every year at the World Economic Forum, on the margins of it, the Oxfam releases a report in which they say how many people in the world own as much wealth as the poorest half. And the numbers have now gone down from triple figures to double figures. It's less than 100. That's the figures, that's what we're talking about. That's the world that we're in. And I think that, what does this mean for us? It means that we've actually got to have, and here comes the phrase that we're all using, we've got to have a radical approach to economics. We can't be carried on as we have been because the changes that we're going to face are disruptive. Now, the definition that's been around on radical economic transformation, we've got to bring about fundamental changes in the productive structure of our economy and also in the patterns of ownership, participation, and management in favor of the majority of the population. That's what we've got to do. We've got to bring about a radical change in our productive structure and in our patterns of inclusion. We've got to bring this about to place us on a different kind of growth path which can deliver higher levels of more inclusive economic growth. If we don't do this, we're not going to be in a position to solve the problems of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. I think that's what's staring us in the face. And so what does this entail? It entails that we need to move up the value chain as an economy. We cannot any longer afford to be an economy whose position is primarily determined by the fact that we are producers and exporters of primary mineral commodities. That is what colonialism defined our role as. we need to break away from that, because what happens is that those mineral commodities are used in somebody else's industrial processes. And if we look at the value chains, we will see that the smallest part of the final product, and actually a diminishing part of the final product, is made up of the raw material that goes in it. The value of the raw materials in your iPad is a very small proportion of the total value of that iPad. We've got to move up the value chain. We've got to move into more complex activities, value-added activities, and that means that we've got to industrialize. That's what it's about. Now, I think that we've been saying this for a while, and we've been trying to do some of this for quite a while. What it takes is it takes us to have a more determined effort to have a more active and inclusive industrial policy. So one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to use the policy tools. The policy tools include that we must take firm and clear decisions that we will act to use our trade policy tools as tools of industrial development. We will use our trade policy tools informed by the needs of industrial development. We will take decisions when it comes to procurement in favor of locally produced products. And we will support the emergence of value chains that allow more participation by more industrial activities in our own country. And finally, and I say only finally, we must put our money where our mouth is. We must support all of this with the deployment of incentive programs. That, I think, is what it's about. Simultaneously, I think we're going to have to reduce the level of concentration in this economy. We're going to have to create a more competitive economy with more opportunities for more entrance into supplier development. At the same time, we're going to have to look very closely and carefully at the impact of this fourth industrial revolution and prepare ourselves for the new world that lies ahead. Potentially, this could mean much lower barriers to entry for small businesses using this kind of technology. More opportunities to use the new technology to find new solutions to all kinds of developmental challenges. But it will also raise the bar for entry of workers into manufacturing jobs, because you will have to have a higher level of skill. That's what it is. I think the good news in South Africa, and I often spend quite a lot of my day job walking around factories, the good news is that we're not the cutting edge of it, but we have more robotics, more computerized programs in our industries in South Africa. Quite often managers will tell me quite innocently that they've taken the human error out of quality control. What do they mean precisely? Is there used to be workers looking at all the rejects, now they've got a machine, a computer. The workers are probably wearing a white coat and pressing buttons rather than wearing overalls and doing heavy lifting. So the EFF should probably change the uniform. But the point is that where we are there as South Africa, our young people, female as well as male, are quite capable of operating these processes and doing very well, winning awards in the company for productivity, competitiveness, and whatever. But they've all got some kind of post-secondary qualification and probably in some kind of engineering or ICT-related discipline. That's what we've got. Those are the challenges that we've got. Let me move a little bit from, I'm going to come back to the trade issues if I've got time, but I want to just move from the macro that I've been talking about down a little bit to the micro. I guess what I'm trying to do is do what Einstein failed to do, which was to produce the synthesis between relativity and quantum mechanics. I'm going to sort of try and do it. And I want to home in on one of our programs, which is the Black Industrialist Program. Because I think the Black Industrialist Program is speaking to two of the imperatives that we've got. One is it's trying to support more industrialists. It's trying to actually go to people among the industrialists who've got more confidence in the future, who are more willing to invest than perhaps some of the other industrialists. I'm not saying that we don't need the others, we do need the others, but we're speaking to people whose horizon is South Africa, whose future depends on the well-being of the South African economy, and are willing to invest now. That's what we're doing. It speaks to that. But secondly, it also speaks to trying to take people, because we have quite a lot of black people active in the industrial economy of this country, but all at the very bottom and all at a very low level of activity. What we do is through our program, we are trying to take the best of them and raise them to the next level. And so I think that there's a bit of a lesson in our program, because up to now we have supported 46. They have invested 3.7 billion in the industrial economy, and they've created about 8,000 direct jobs and about 12,000 indirect jobs. Now, one of the things about this program is that there are some quite tight rules to get on it, and I think intentionally so. You have to show you are an industrialist. You're not just someone who's got shares in somebody else's company and presenting somebody else to get a packet of money. You have to show you're an industrialist. You lead the company. You've got risk in the game, and that you have a viable project to actually raise the competitiveness of your enterprise. That's what you have to do. Who chooses? Not me. It's a funding forum. The DTI offers a grant incentive. Other participating bodies like the NEF or the IDC will offer a loan. And I've seen when we go around, the people that are getting onto this program, and they are in agro-processing, cable manufacturing, they make in electronics. These are all people that have actually devoted a considerable amount of their lives to learning the trade where they are. There are people who have got engineering degrees. There are people who have worked in a business, developed a skill and a capacity. And through our program, we managed to take them to the next level. Now, I think what we're looking forward to is that we can have bigger partnerships and we can expand this kind of program, because I think that where we can find quality individuals involved in the productive economy and we can expand the space for them. We can also expand the space, I think, by using our broad-based black economic empowerment rules more judiciously. For example, we now say that supplier development has to be part of the scorecard if you want to have a decent scorecard. And supplier development we understand to mean not just we don't want you to put a packet of money in, but we actually want you to work actively to mentor, develop, and to ensure that the suppliers that you have on board are capable of doing the work that's required. That's what we want to achieve in this area. So let me just say a couple of things about the trade, because that was also what was said by our host from First National Bank. We think that industrialization has to happen on a continental scale. Because if you look at the world as it is now, look at those countries, emerging economies that are doing well, the Indias and the Chinas of this world, they are now turning to their domestic market as a source of growth and moving up the value chain. Because even if at a certain point in time they were exporting into the developed world, that option is not available in the same way as it was, because the developed world itself is trying to reindustrialize, and that's the reality. So, what do we need to do? We need to have a large regional market, because as a domestic, as any individual country, we don't have a large enough domestic market to sustain deep industrialization. And so the regional integration is essentially to try to achieve the scale required to support deep industrialization on the African continent. And that's why the focus of regional integration now is not deepening integration in our existing communities, turning SADC into a customs union. It's broadening integration across our regional communities. SADC, COMESA, East African Community being the first crack at this, and now the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We've been at this for some time. It's taken longer than I think our heads of state thought it would. But nonetheless, I think we can say that we are now at the point where we have the framework agreement in place for the tripartite. But the framework agreement doesn't mean anything commercially for players in the economy. But what I can say is that ourselves as SACU at the last summit that we had a week or two ago, we committed ourselves to working together to try to ensure that we conclude the tariff schedule agreement with the East African community by the end of this month, by the end of July. And I think if that happens, and there's no reason why it shouldn't happen, no reason at all, then I think we will have made a very significant step towards enlarging the market for South African players, but also East African players coming into our market. So expect to drink more East African coffee, tea, avocados, flowers, whatever, but at the same time there will be significant opportunities for many of us in Kenya. And when the next one is going to be Egypt, where we're not too far behind. So I think that we're beginning to make some progress. Probably by the end of the year or early next year, we will have the framework in place for the continental free trade area. We will have taken a step forward. And I think that once we get these building blocks in place, and our approach is development integration, which means that we have to ensure that the trade integration is complemented by infrastructure development, which means both trade facilitation issues, improving procedures, as was mentioned by First National Bank, and actually building the physical infrastructure. Because one of the things, we are now learning from our colleague, the Premier of the Western Cape, that we need to understand what colonialism did and didn't do. The infrastructure of colonialism on the African continent was to take the raw material from the mine to the port and out of the region, not to connect up the economies one to another. So if we want to trade among ourselves, we've got to address that infrastructure deficit that connects our economies up one with another. And we've also got to cooperate to create the emergence of value chains in the continent. And at the same time, we've got to defend our policy space and our prioritization of the African regional integration against all kinds of demands that are coming from people across the world. So let me mention one. The World Trade Organization is moving to its ministerial in December, just before our national conference, actually, TG. And there are all kinds of discussions about what should be on the agenda. What doesn't look like it's going to be on the agenda is the issue that all of us have agreed in Doha it needed to be the priority, the reform of agricultural trade so that there's more opportunities for poor farmers in the developing world to benefit without being subject to unfair subsidies that distort trade. That is unlikely to feature very strongly. More likely, we're going to be seeing demands to start text-based negotiations on electronic commerce. And I think that we acknowledge that e-commerce as part of the fourth industrial revolution is critically important. That's not the same as saying we're ready to put in place trade rules, which if you look at the proposals, will probably cement the situation in favor of the status quo, where a tiny number of countries currently dominate this space. More precisely, what's been sought is that we would forgo localization rules. We would forgo any kind of obligation for people operating to supply the source codes, anything of that sort. And what this would probably mean is it would mean that e-commerce would operate along with all these other transfers in the interests of those who are already involved in the production in this area. Now, if we think that this is just about the current e-commerce, which is mostly about videos, music, books, we must not kid ourselves, because increasingly the transfer of technology through the Internet of Things will move into areas like shoes, where programs will be sent from one 3D will be sent through the internet to a 3D printer. We need to be very, very careful about all of this. So I think that that's part of it. The other thing, and last point I want to make, is I think that we've seen a world, and I didn't really say this before, as this fourth industrial revolution has taken off, as globalization has operated, as inequality has operated, we've seen a backlash in the developed world, taking the form of a fairly nationalistic populism. It's moving us away, I think, from the multilateralism that we had before. A multilateralism which I think was one where we were all theoretically equal, but as George Orwell said, some of us were more equal than others. That was what we had. But I think that what we really need is we need a different kind of multilateralism. Because that fourth industrial revolution can liberate humanity from a lot of backbreaking toil and bring huge benefits, but it can also widen inequalities. And if it's not going to widen the inequalities between developed and developing countries and within countries, if it's not going to do that, it's going to take a multilateralism to address this. And a different kind of multilateralism where we all come together to ensure that we create an environment for inclusive growth and participation by all of us. I think this is the issue in the future. Now, I'm not going to go into that, but I think I simply want to say, by way of my last remarks, is that I think that we, as South Africa, as I said earlier, I think the biggest challenge that we face is that we have a trust deficit, and that is reflected at the moment in a lack of consumer and investor confidence. We see this now in that a number of factories are beginning to go on to short time because there's low levels of consumer demand. Where we see also that investments are marking time rather than anything else. And I think we need to come together and address those challenges so that we can place ourselves on a trajectory to address the big challenges of the future. I think if we do that as South Africans, I think we are well placed to be able to take our role in the world economy and in Africa in the 21st century as it's unfolding. Those are the issues I think that we ought to be talking about. Those are the issues that we're going to be confronting. And those are the issues that I'm confident that as South Africans, we can find ways of working together to the benefit of all of us, to the benefit of a higher level of growth, and to the benefit of more inclusive growth. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.